Ugh, how long was I out for? It's probably been like 3 new sets and like 1,000 new secret lairs since I've gone to sleep. Okay. I was a little bit over on the sets, but the number of secret lairs is pretty close. Oh. Oh man, it must have been out for a while. Brando and Gary are up to Final Fantasy VI on the Dufferin Avenue Media Network Twitch stream. How am I going to know what's going on if I missed Final Fantasies 1 through 5? I got to be able to follow that plot. Okay. Calm down, there's a lot of those games. I probably haven't missed that much. I mean, it's not like they've updated the promo code for our sponsor, FusionGamingOnline.com, right? Right? Oh, holy shit. Hello and welcome to the third season of Gemstone Mine here as part of Commander Cookout Media Group. I'm John, and today we're going to talk about some of the most exciting topics in Commander deck building. And I want to cover something that everyone always goes wild for: utility lands. What? Just me? Well, while I was on hiatus, the new Final Fantasy set dropped, and it got me brewing again in a big way. I've always been someone who's loved low color decks, and there are a lot of cool options in this set, and I might talk about some of these decks at some point if there's any interest. But what I realized was that I kind of let slide out of my brain the big advantages that low color decks have when you're trying to brew with them. While I was on hiatus, I didn't do a whole lot of brewing, but as I got back into it, I quickly realized that what low color decks have is more room to run utility lands. Today, we're going to talk about utility lands, why you should use them, and how to evaluate them. But first, make sure you're keeping current with everything that's going on the entire Commander Cookout Media Group. And of course, check out our sponsor, FusionGamingOnline.com, using the promo code on the screen and in the description. To overgeneralize in a big way, the player who spends the most mana in a game of Commander is probably going to be the player who wins. They've probably had a bigger influence on the game by taking more game actions and more impactful game action. Every time you reach your untap step with mana unspent, you're leaving value on the table. Utility lands give you something to try to do with the extra mana that you have lying around, meaning that they're great for draw-go style control decks or value decks that are playing at instant speed. Admittedly, they are a lot less useful when you're tapping out during your turn to cast permanents and other spells at sorcery speed, but even in a typical tap-out aggro deck, they give you a plan B to fall back on if you need to recover from a board wipe or if you've already dumped your hand. Many utility lands can serve as useful mana sinks, a topic that we talked about last season, allowing you to use unspent mana to draw cards, put bodies on the battlefield, or eke out other forms of advantage. Some of my favorites being cards like Castle Lockplane or War Room. Other utility lands often will give you bargain prices on some other one-off effects, especially interaction like the channel lands from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty like Boseiju and Odawara, cards which have made a big impact on cEDH. However, utility lands aren't free, and it pays to be choosy when it comes to picking your utility lands. Most decks are going to prioritize running fixing over utility lands, something that we talked about extensively during our last season's series on mana bases. And these are important. Good fixing and good tempo means you can cast your spells on curve. Especially when you're running cards with color-intensive mana costs, having proper fixing can make all the difference. High color decks like 3 and 4 color shells common in cEDH need to prioritize their fixing, maxing out their type dual lands with fetches, rainbow lands, and only leaving a tiny number of slots free for utility. While low color decks have fewer options for running dual lands and frankly an easier time hitting their fixing requirements, they have the luxury of getting to play more utility lands. But even low color decks need to be a little choosy. You still need some basics, even if only to make sure you get paid back for a creature of yours being pathed to exiled or a land being Field of Ruin. Green decks still want to have enough basics to be able to consistently fetch with their ramp spells, and black decks usually still want to have some swamps around, whether the effect they're going to use with it is Cabal Coffers or something like Cryptghast. The more swamps you have, the more black mana you're going to get. The bracket system mostly insulates you from being outright punished for non-basic lands, with hosers like Blood Moon or Ruination being considered to be mass mana denial. but a few utility lands, particularly the cycle from Tarkir Dragonstorm and Throne of Eldraine, depend on controlling a land with a particular basic land type in order to enter untapped. And if you're going to put in too many untyped non-basics, your utility lands are going to be costing you tempo. The first basic you cut for utility land is probably the least value and will have the least impact on your deck overall, but each additional basic you cut for utility is more and more expensive. I personally try to keep my total number of basics between 10 to 15 in a 2-color deck, skewing higher from playing lots of basic land fetching, or a particular payoff like Cabal Coffers, or if I have a particularly intensive mana cost with 3 or more colored pips. Again, you can see more on that in our episode on mana bases and fixing from Season 2. Now, once my mana base is fixed, I want to make sure I do include some utility lands, especially in my low color decks that I'm working on. Utility lands, though, do have a few hidden costs associated with them, outside of costing you tempo and fixing. Most utility lands that require you to tap them to activate their ability are actually virtually 1 mana more expensive than they would appear otherwise, since you can't tap the land to pay for its own ability. This should go without saying, but it's very easy to overlook and say, oh, I got 3 lands untapped and my utility land costs 3 mana to activate. I'm good. I've definitely not made that mistake multiple times myself. In addition, you usually have to choose between sandbagging the effect of the utility land and its basic function as a mana source, especially when the utility land requires you to sacrifice the land to access its ability, and even more so when it's one of the channel lands. The bottom line is that in general, you should probably focus on playing out your lands and staying on curve the earlier you are in the game, the closer you are to the getting ready stage, and usually in the earlier parts of the all set up stage of the game. But you can be a little looser and sandbag more as you approach the late game, when you're in the going for it stage, and top decking gas becomes more valuable than drawing more mana. So play out your MDFCs as lands to stay on curve on turns 1 to 3, but if you top deck interaction on turn 6, sandbagging it is probably a little bit better. Not all utility lands are created equal, though. The 3 main considerations when you're looking at a utility land are, what does it do to your tempo, how does it affect your fixing, and what utility does it actually offer. Tempo is basically whether the land enters tapped or untapped, and what the cost is to make sure it enters untapped. Most Commander players are familiar with shock lands, where for the cost of taking 2 damage to have a type dual land enter untapped, that's pretty easy. These are considered to be premium fixing for a reason. The best utility lands offer a relatively easy setup cost to meet and to achieve that enters untapped condition, such as the Lord of the Rings rare land cycle requiring you to control a legendary creature, pretty easy when we have our commanders, the Modern Horizons 3 rare land cycle that requires you to have a basic of a matching color to enter untapped, or the Tarkir Dragonstorm rare land cycle that enters untapped if you control either of its enemy-colored basic land types from the 3-colored wedge. Meanwhile, the worst of the utility lands always enter with the cost of being tapped, thus costing you tempo. And in those cases, unless it offers some really serious utility or amazing fixing, usually not worth including. In most cases, though, fixing is a trade-off that you make when you pick utility lands. For example, one of my favorites is War Room, a card that I like to include because it is repeatable card draw at a low cost on a land, but it offers 0 fixing, providing only colorless mana. On the other hand, the cycle of the Horizon lands, which are templated after the Future Sight card Horizon Canopy, offer you mana fixing on a pain land, which is pretty good, with the ability to sack the land for a one-off card draw effect. We're making a clear decision there as to whether we want better fixing or more reliable card draw, and both can be very good. But there is a cost. If you're going too low on your fixing, you may not be able to afford to include War Room in your deck. Without enough colored mana sources, War Room can really hurt to see in your opening hand, whereas it feels amazing to draw late game when you can start dumping mana into it to draw more cards. Finally, utility, well, that's the reason we're looking at utility lands at all. What do they offer you outside of tapping for mana? I've already talked about War Room several times, because it's an effect that I rate very highly, sinking mana into a land to draw more cards. This is a much more generically useful and powerful effect than, say, something like Maze of Shadows, which either taps for colorless mana or can tap to untap an attacking creature with the keyword Shadow and prevent all damage it would deal and receive, effectively removing it from combat. Look, I love Tempest as much as the next guy, but I'm just saying, I don't think that Shadow the deck is going to take over the metagame. Unless during my hiatus there was some kind of a secret lair that I missed that potentially included some kind of video game universes beyond with a powerful effect on a card named Shadow, but nah, I wasn't on hiatus for that long. Anyway, this is the reason why I tend to rate cards like War Room and Castle Lochthwain so highly, and why I consider even one-shot effects like Cephalid Coliseum and the Horizon Lands. Card draw is powerful. On the other hand, there's really nice cards out there, like from Modern Horizons 3 we had Arena of Glory, which is basically a weird filter land where you take your red mana and turn it into red-red to cast a creature with haste. It comes into play in a really clutch way in my Narset cEDH deck, where you really want to be swinging with Narset Enlightened Exile as soon as possible, but I have almost no use for that kind of land in my Tana Tevesh Grind 'em Out list. A deck where I really don't care about haste or getting my commander down fast and getting him attacking. Usually, Tevesh just eats Tana. I mean, I don't care about the haste in that case, so it's not a card I'm even considering in that list. But it is a more specialized case that you'll know your deck wants or not. The other reason I wanted to talk about utility lands is that they operate on an axis that's largely uninteractable. I've already talked about how the bracket system largely formalizes the old social contract that made land destruction a no-no. But even outside of land destruction, lands are an effect that's just hard to interact with. Earlier this year, Magic Pro Sam Black brought a Rograk Thrasios list to a cEDH event and turned the metagame on to the power of what are being called Turbo Cradle decks. Sam's list included Ouroboros Breezecaller, 1 and a blue for a 1/1 Moonfolk Wizard with flying, and 2, return a land you control to its owner's hand, untap target land. That's pretty nice when you can tap your Gaia's Cradle for lots of mana, spend 2 of it, bounce another land you don't care about, to untap Gaia's Cradle and get lots more mana, then dump that mana into Thrasios to get more cards into your hand to spend lots and lots of mana the next time you do it. But it's even better when you combine it with a utility land called Talon Gates of Madara, a land that phases out a creature when it enters, taps for a colorless, filters 1 generic into 1 mana of any color, and has the nifty ability for 4, put Talon Gates from your hand directly into play. Which means that if you can tap your Cradle for at least 5 green, you can tap Talon Gates for 1, spend 2 of that 6 mana to activate Breezecaller, bouncing Talon Gates to your hand to untap Cradle, then spending 4 to play Talon Gates from your hand and phase a creature out. And you can do this for every creature in play if you want. If your Cradle taps for at least 6 green mana though, that's where the Unbounded Greed mana, and Talon Gates has a nifty mode where you can filter that green mana into any color you want. Cast anything you want after you draw your entire deck with Thrasios. And all of this without ever casting a spell. That force of will in your opponent's hands that they were sandbagging is useless against this. Utility lands are a uniquely powerful option in Commander, and they're a power that really favors low-color decks. Sure, they have their costs, but if you know how to use them and are picky with which ones you include, they offer a lot of utility for your deck to grind out extra advantage. If you're looking for other utility lands, I've actually included a link in the description to a package I built for myself on Moxfield to make deck building a little easier, which someone so cool actually managed to find this package before I even uploaded the video. Yes, I saw you. I included a primer that explains my choices to include or exclude different utility lands and what a summary is of how I rate utility lands, similar to what we talked about in our episode today. But I'm always looking for more, so if you have a favorite utility land that I didn't include, let me know about it. You can talk to us about it down in the comments on YouTube, where we're part of Commander Cookout Media Group. Or you can tell me about it on the Commander Cookout Discord, which you can join by becoming part of the CCO Patreon, or you can send it as an email to gemstonemindpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm John, and this is Gemstone Mind.